earlier.
Run down and get a feed and come back.
Well, anyway, today is quite a packed lecture. We've got two parts. One is on risk, and one is on software cost estimation. And the second part is particularly important because it has all the components that you guys need to do that first assignment deliverable that's due, I think, next Friday. Right? So that's one to pay very close attention to. And I mean, I've had a couple of submissions already for that first deliverable assignment. We'll go through the content today. You know, we'll get through it because you need it, however long it takes. And for those who submitted already, if you want to, if you want to resubmit following this, then feel free to do so. Which I strongly encourage you to. Yeah, there's been two submissions already. One wasn't so bad, there was just one mistake, and another one had even more mistakes. Guess which one yours was?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know which one mine was.
You should read the questions properly and actually answer everything. That's a key thing. But like I said, it's not due yet officially, so if you want to resubmit a new try, give it a go.
Wait, which assessment are you referring to?
The one that's due next Friday.
Not tomorrow, but next week Friday.
Is there something due tomorrow? No, right?
No. So nothing tomorrow.
Alright, good.
Okay. Well, technically, I didn't know that something starts. That will be true.
Different unit. That
Different
one.
unit. Different unit.
So let's get through it. And I'm tempted to start at the second part first.
Yeah.
So we look at risk management towards the end, but basically the contents of the lecture, the thing that your assignment depends upon is really the stuff at the end, describing software estimation techniques in terms of how big a piece of software is going to be, how long it's going to take, in terms of the amount of effort, and in particular looking at function points analysis, which is really a deep topic all on its own, the constructive cost model or COCOMO, and a couple of techniques on how to tell, based on your past performance, whether your estimation is any good or not. Right? And there's some stuff about risk management which is also important, but we'll return to at the end of the lecture. Just to make sure we've all got it, right? So software cost estimation, that's the most important part, so we'll cover that first. All right. So software is the most expensive element in most systems that incorporate software. Right? It's very good, and it's important to somehow estimate how long it's going to take to create, how big it's going to be, because if you delay software, it's the most important and the most costly thing, the costs basically grow. All right. And there's two types of measuring how big software is, or two broad ways. Decompose the thing into various functionalities, have a cost associated with each one of those, and add them all up. And then there's empirical models based on some total measure of how big you think it's going to be, how long it's going to take to produce. And we'll look at function points analysis in terms of decomposing a thing, and COCOMO in terms of an empirical model. Right? So the decomposition techniques, you can go at two levels based on the problem, in terms of giving a measure, in terms of the problem domain, so lines of codes, actual function points when you do the function point analysis. Or you can give a measure of size in terms of the process that it's going to take to build that software. And that's really, as it says, the most commonly used technique, because really that's what we care about. How long is it going to take us to build this thing? Right? So in terms of effort, how long it's going to take, basically the common unit of measure is either a day, month, or year, but because a project has maybe have more than one person working on it, so we call it person days, person months, person years, which traditionally is called, well, the typical duration is in terms of months, and we call them man months. Right, so you'll see that abbreviation a lot around MM, means man month. Right? In terms of problem-based, you'll see LOC, which stands for lines of code, FP, which stands for function points, and you'll see another acronym, which also means lines of code, which is, it's KDIS, I think. Right. And K stands for kilo, the 1000, and D stands for delivered, I stands for instruction, and S for statements. So thousands of delivered instruction statements, which means lines of code, LOC, and commented also here KLOC, thousands of lines of code. Right? So how many KLOCs did you cut today? You know, it's a common question around the office, and I cut 10,000 KLOCs. Right, I cut 1,000, and you did 100. Yeah.
I totally believe you.
Copy and paste.
Most of them were comments and
Yeah.
or spaces.
White space is important.
But no, you look on the bottom in Visual Studio, how many lines you have. Wow, I got more than you. It's all about how big it is, right? Where actually, as we learned earlier, is not, right? And function point analysis is kind of a counter to it. Rather than counting in lines of code, how many types of each function do you have, and the complexities, right? And well, we'll get to that. So, various sizing techniques. No, we won't go into it. We'll just go into the actual concrete ones we're going to examine. And the first one is function points. Right? Who's heard of function point analysis before this unit?
Yeah, project management.
Yeah, okay, but less people that have heard about use cases, so that's encouraging. So it kind of lets me that you guys maybe haven't covered it really, and we're not going to cover it in detail, and it is a really, really big area. Now there's ISO standards on how to do a function point analysis. The most recent one is 2018, and but they're all kind of similar. The actual standard you have to go and buy from wherever in Switzerland, but it basically measures a software product based on these 5 domains, which are kind of worded differently based on which version of the standard you're looking at. And it's an entire discipline doing function point analysis. So, for example, you can become a certified function point analysis expert, where you do this 3-hour test, also from memory, and you have to get 75% right, and you get your certification. Right? And then apparently you're good at estimating how big a software product it is that you're trying to make. And the 5 bits of information that you decompose your proposed software product into is number of inputs, number of outputs, number of user inquiries, and in some textbook it's called inquiries is in the standard, number of files, and number of external interfaces. If you look at the latest version of the standard, they're labeled slightly differently, but they kind of mean the same thing. It is a bit confusing. What do these actually mean? Right, but again, the standard kind of defines them. So an input, right, in terms of how many inputs you have, it's basically a process that takes an input from the user and does some processing. An output is a process in your system that includes at least one mathematical calculation of something and produces an output for the user. A user inquiry is where a user requests something, some information from the system, and is retrieved. So it kind of sounds like an output, but without any mathematical transformations undergoing. So basically just presenting information from the system. Because basically just by their titles, you can't really tell what's the difference between a user inquiry and an output. Output purely by definition means it's sending something out, right? But according to the function point analysis specification, it's not just passing something out, it's taking something, processing it, and then spitting it out. So that's basically it. And each one of those, so your function might have a number of inputs, might have a number of outputs, might have a number of inquiries. And they won't all be of the same magnitude of complexity. So what that means, handling one input will take a certain amount of effort to implement versus another input which might take more or less effort. Right? So with function point analysis, you typically have a table, and typically two tables. This is kind of condensed into one thing. But basically for each one of those 5 factors, you have a count of how many your application is going to have. And you decompose that count into the 5 different categories. So you might have 5 simple ones, 5 complex ones, 5 average ones, and so on. And if you want to work out the total number of function points per category, you basically have to multiply through the number of this type times the weighting plus the number of the next type times its weighting plus the number of the next type times its weighting, and so on. And you add them all together to get the function points for that category. It's just for inputs or outputs or so on. And then you total up the totals to get your total number of function points. Right? That's kind of how it works. And what you actually do with those, with that total, is you put it into this equation, right? Where, I'm putting in the wrong thing here, this equation, where fp underscore total is the total sum from that previous page. And then you multiply it by a kind of scaling factor. So you sum up all the function points based on the actual functionality, and then you multiply by a scaling factor, and that scaling factor has 2 constants, K1 and K2, which are scaling factors determined empirically. What does empirically mean? No, so you can determine something by a rigorous mathematical proof. Or you can say, look, this is what it's going to have to be, I can prove it. Or you can do it empirically, where you look at a number of projects and tweak those, the K1 and K2 until they're about right. So that's kind of what it means. And the typically accepted K1 and K2, I can't remember once, about 0.6 something, no, they're on another slide. So basically they're given to you, right? And whatever company you're working for, they would have tuned their K1 and K2 based on their previous experience. So K1, so a constant term, plus K2 times the sum of a number of things, right? And the number of things, the Fi, are called complexity adjustment values based on responses to a set of questions. Right? And for each question, the answer is a number of, well, there's 6 possible answers, from 0, no influence, to 5, where that thing is essential. Right? And the actual questions are on the next page. Right, so, does the system require a reliable backup and recovery? If it doesn't, so if I go back, no influence, then that's a 0 for that. Right? Are data communications required? Go previous page. If that's essential, that gets a 5. Right? And so by whatever your actual function points are, how many inputs, output, whatever, then you scale them by, where are we? By the result of all these questions, how much complexity is actually in your system. Right? So if you do a full worked example, where you have inputs, outputs, inquiries, files, external interfaces, you have a number, you have an average weight factor, which, look, in your assignment you get a matrix of weights and you get a matrix of counts. You do the multiplication through. Don't try to come up with an average weight factor, because it's not just adding the number, dividing by the number.
It's already given to you.
Sorry?
So is the average weight factor already given to you?
No, I don't think so. I think you get average weight factor for each category. Right. So simple versus complex. No, this is pretty short, right?
Yeah.
No, you get 2 matrices.
Well, don't ask me, I apparently did shit in the assignment.
But that question you did okay. Right. So you multiply through, you get an answer for each category. 30 times 4 is apparently 120, is that right? Yeah. Wow. And then you add up this column and you get 609. Do you get 609 if you add all those up? Probably right. This first column you get an 8 and a 1, which is 9. So that explains the 9 there. And so that means probably the rest of it is correct, right? We don't need to check. And then remember, this kind of 609, that's the, if I go back, that's the 609 as your FP total. And then you multiply it by this K1 plus K2 times the sum of the questions. So
Just double checking there with your data on that. Is it K1 plus K2 times sum, or do you actually...
it's exactly as it
K1
says. So if it helps, put brackets around the K2 and the sum, right? Because you do the multiplication first.
Yeah.
I don't know who this BIMDAS is that you know. It's this is the guy who never agrees with you, right?
Always agrees.
Yeah, brackets, indices. There you go. Some of you have been to high school. Wow, this is exciting. Yeah. But yes, so we've worked out FP total, and now we multiply it by K1 plus K2 plus the sum of the Fs. To get the sum of the Fs, here's an example. Right, so for this particular application, someone's answered these questions. They're the answers, going from not involved at all, 0 to essential 5. You add it up, 54. And then the magical equation. So you get 609 times this factor, and K1 0.65, K2 0.01. Times whatever we got from the previous page, 54. So the total complexity adjustment factor for this example, 1.19. You multiply that by the number of function points, 609, and you get 725. You guys checking the maths on this? No, I haven't. I just took it for granted. Should I be updating this slide with something or no? It's correct? Yeah? Yeah. I was sure I introduced some error just to catch you guys out, but you really think it's okay? Yeah. I didn't introduce any errors that I know of. So. Okay. And this is what you get out of it, or this is what you can calculate out of it. Actually, it's not even the total number of things you can calculate out of it. So you can calculate productivity by dividing the function point value by the number of person months that you're expecting it to take. Quality by taking the number of defects. Now, once you have some divided by function points, and cost by dividing dollars by function points, by the total value. It doesn't really mention in the lecture notes, but you can actually, there's conversion techniques to convert function points into lines of code. Right? But because the number of lines of code to implement something is dependent on the implementation language, you basically have a language implementation factor, which will be different for Java versus Python versus C++ versus something else. But basically, it's just a straight multiplication. You multiply function points by this language factor, and it gives you kilo lines of code as an estimate. So that's another thing. Now, the advantages of using function points is that they're independent of programming language, right? So then you can convert into KLOCs based on the implementation language as well, but you get an overall idea of the complexity of an application. And the disadvantage is that you've got these magic numbers. What was it? 0.65, 0.01. This is it. How important are these things? Which also can be subjective. These scaling factors. And it's said that function points are biased towards data processing environments, right? Because they focus on inputs and outputs and transactions and things like that. Any questions on function points? Very good. Now for some empirical estimation, I mean the constants for function points, probably they're derived empirically as well. But a full empirical estimation model called COCOMO. Well, the original one is COCOMO 81 or COCOMO 1. There's also COCOMO 2. It actually inspired a song by the Beach Boys.
Nation, right?
That's what my grandma tells me anyway. So it's developed by a guy with a really cool name, Barry Beam or Barry Bohm or however you. But Barry is the cool part, really, right? And there's 3 versions of it, and within each one, basically, there's 3 versions of that, right? The slides here talk about the simple model, so the simple COCOMO or the basic COCOMO, and then there's 2 others, intermediate and advanced, and there's additional slides on Blackboard that talk about intermediate, right? And then we'll talk about the difference. The core of it is basically the same, is that they try to measure effort in terms of person months by doing a calculation on the kilo lines of code that you're estimating this thing is going to take. Right? So, the problem with that is that before you can work out this estimated effort in man months, you kind of need to have a pretty good accurate estimate of how many lines of code your thing is going to have, right? And to do that, sure, you can do your function point analysis, get your function points, multiply through by the language factor to get kilo lines of code. It's already making some assumptions and is a bit biased, and as we said, and then you plug that into this other model, which is also empirically derived and also assumes certain things, and you get another estimate. Right? So the further you take this estimation, the further you go along, in terms of uncertainty and risk, actually. Right? But the basic COCOMO calculates effort in person months, or here mm, it doesn't mean Martin Masek, man months, as two constants to do with kilo lines of code, right? First constant A is a multiplier. That's what this star means. And the 2 star, sometimes you see it as the hat symbol, is to the power of, right? So it's kilo lines of code to the power of B multiplied by A. Right? And in terms of the 3 modes, so let's say we take the basic COCOMO model, it's got 3 modes. All that's different between the modes is A and B, and also C and D when we get down to here, right? That's the only difference between the modes, right? And the modes are organic, semi-detached, and embedded. All that's different is those constants. And now we'll see in a later slide, okay, for a software product, which mode should you choose? And there's some guidelines, but there's no clear-cut thing. The guidelines basically overlap. Your thing might meet some from here, some from there, some from there. So maybe a good idea is even to calculate all of those and have a worst case and a best case scenario. Right? All right. Out of the effort in man months, you can calculate productivity, which is just the kilo lines of codes divided by the man months needed. You can calculate the schedule in months based on your man months and 2 constants in terms of scheduling months in time to develop this thing. Right. And the average staffing that you need basically is the number of man months divided by the schedule. Because if your estimation model says it's going to take this many man months, and your schedule says it should take this long, from there you have to calculate how many mans do you need, right? Or how many persons you need to actually do this. So A, B, C, D are constants to do with the modes. And so that's for the basic COCOMO. The only difference between this and the intermediate and advanced is that the intermediate and advanced add some more factors to it. They take this, and again, it's a kind of additional scaling based on a set of factors. And really the intermediate mode has only a few factors. The advanced mode has a lot more factors, right? Yes.
Which one are we supposed to use in the assignment? The basic or
So for the assignment, because you get a listing of those extra factors for intermediate mode, COCOMO, but you should use the intermediate mode. Don't use the basic. Well, mode, I get confused because there's, what are they called? Levels. So the level should be intermediate, and the mode you have to figure out based on the description. No, the mode is organic, semi-detached, or embedded. Right? How do you work out which mode? It's kind of hard. There's 3. So these are the rough characteristics. For organic mode, if you're implementing this in a stable environment with minimal need of new algorithms, low premium on early completion, so there's no real push to have it finished early, small size, less than 50 KLOCs, and your staff is stable and experienced in the development environment, then you go for organic, right? So you can see by the definition Organic mode is kind of where you're developing something that's reasonably safe. Right? It's small, the environment doesn't change, you've got the experience, you've got some confidence. Right? Embedded mode, on the other hand, is the most risky mode. So the characteristics, time restraints owing to hardware, software, regulations and operational procedures, high cost of change, and any size. Yes.
High cost of change, what do you define that as? Because if you're in the middle of trying to estimate the cost, how do you know if it's got a higher cost of change? Because you've not yet costed it.
So the COCOMO model tells you how many man months it's going to take to make something. It's not cost per se. Right. So I guess it's not really the total cost of the product. It's basically the product category you're making. If you need to have a change, is it going to be really, really expensive? Right? Like, are you writing software that's going to keep track of the number of visitors to a web page, and every time you get one more visitor, it ticks over a number? If you were to change that code, or if for some reason there was a bug in it and you had to fix it, that would be very low cost. Right? If you're developing some kind of an automated flight system which prevents an aircraft from stalling, right? But if an aircraft is going to a stall, you want to push the nose down to let it build up speed. Now, what's the cost if you get that wrong? Right? So already a few hundred people are dead, right? They're bringing out a patch in the next week or so. And that's a really, really high cost of change. And as well, that's an example where you've got regulations, you need to get your software certified, it has to go through all these things. So they would have been using the embedded mode. Right? And the semi-detached mode is somewhere in between the two. Right? Now, it's not equally distant between the two. So you've got simple here, organic, you've got very, very complex embedded, and semi-detached is actually closer to the organic. Right. So in between, less than 300 kilolines of code, and basically because semi-detached and organic mode are so similar, you just play by ear and usually go based on the number of lines of code. So if it's less than 50 klocs, you go for organic. If it's over 50 klocs but less than 300 klocs, you use semi-detached. If it's a safety critical system, if it's a system where something's going to hit the roof, if things go bad, doesn't matter how small it is, you go for the embedded mode. Right. And the only difference, go to the next slide, again, is the constants. So you go A, B, C, and D, for calculating the effort and the time of development, or development time, TDEV. So for the simplest mode, A is 2.4, B is 1.05, versus the most difficult mode, A is 3.6 and B is 1.2. Right? It doesn't seem like a huge difference, right? And this is for simple COCOMO, basic COCOMO, right? For intermediate COCOMO, it's slightly different. So here's an example of a calculation. So let's say you have 32 klocs and you're developing in organic mode. You put the numbers into the equations and you get a number out, right? So 32 to the power of 1.05 equals something, multiplied by 2.4 gives you 91 person months of development effort. To work out the schedule, there it is, so C and D. So you take 91 person months to the power of 0.38 times by 2.5, 14 months. Right. How many staff do you need? Well, it takes 91 man-months of effort, and you should be delivering it in 14 months, so you can't use one person. Right? One person won't be able to do it. Right? Because then it will take 91 months rather than 14 months. So you do the division, average staffing over the whole project, 6.5. What does FSP mean? What does that stand for? Software personnel, that's it. Actually, you're paying attention to the slide. Full-time equivalent software personnel.
So that 0.5 would just be someone who works part-time.
Yeah, that's right. So six full-timers and someone who comes in for half a day and each day, or no, it's or is less productive. I don't know. So that's a calculation for the simple or the basic COCOMO in organic mode. If you want to know what the difference is between this and intermediate COCOMO, when we get out of that and we get into this, right? So this is the extra slides that are up on Blackboard, and since you've got to do this for the assignment, we should also go through that. So the basic model has just that. Now those two equations really with 4 constants and a couple of other equations to calculate off of that. Intermediate and the advanced one have both, but they also have this thing, this adjustment factor. EAF, effort adjustment factor, based on some measures of the application. A little bit like when we did function points, right? We had the function points, and then we had a scaling, right? EAF is defined as the product of the effort multipliers corresponding to each of the cost drivers of your project. So now there's a few technical words in there. For those of you who didn't do maths, what does it mean by product of? Times. Add. Someone said add or add? Yeah, okay, so there you go. So for those of you who didn't hear that, product means multiply. Sum means add. So we're not using product, not like milk is the product of a cow. We're multiplying things together. So we get a series of these coefficients, and you multiply them together to get a single number. Okay. What are these coefficients? Well, I've got to scroll down here. There you go. So here's an example of a cost driver matrix. Right? This isn't talking about a particular application. It says, well, for a particular application, your cost drivers for each of these cost drivers could either be very low, nominal, high, very high, or extra high. And depending on what it is, that's what you use as the multiplier. Right? And the actual cost drivers are analyst capability, application experience, product complexity, database size, language experience, all the way down to virtual machine experience, virtual machine volatility, if that's a factor, computer turnaround time, whether you're using software tools, and so on.
Where is my experience?
So let's say application experience. Like how experienced are your developers in developing?
Developers as a whole or individual developers?
Well, overall as a team. It doesn't drill down to individual people. So I think application is actually, what's the familiarity with the application? And there's a programmer capability, which is like experience in programming. required software reliability, how important is the schedule, and so on. And you can tell from these scales, some of them go where very low is a larger number than high. For example, endless capability. If the capability is very low, that's bad, right? So you get a bigger number. If the endless capability is very high, you get a low number, because you're better off, right? Other things, so required software reliability. If it's very low, then if you don't require it to be reliable, you get a low number. Right? If you really need it, then you get a high number. Right? So the scale is flipped around based on whether the thing is important if you have it or if you don't have it. Right? And basically what you get for a project, so say, well, someone's analyzed the requirements and they reckon that ACAP is very low, they reckon that tool is very high, they reckon that PCAP is extra high or very high, actually it doesn't go extra high, and that all the other factors are nominal. And what it means by nominal means we don't really care about them. And what the nominal ones get is a multiplier of 1. Right? So like I said, you've got a product of these different things. If something's 1, does it change? No, right? So 1 times 1 is what? 1, right? But also a bigger number or a lower number multiplied by 1 is the very same number. Like think of a number. 23. 23 times 1. 23, so it didn't change. So I ask you guys questions, only very simple ones, because I don't want to embarrass you by you not knowing. That's the other thing I meant to say. I put up a survey on the Blackboard page just to give you guys a chance to let me know how the unit's going and know what do you like, what do you dislike. And it's kind of important to fill in, because it then goes on for planning the rest of the unit and maybe future runs of the unit. So put your feedback in there.
Oh, too many assignments.
Too many jobs, what?
Too many assignments already.
Too many assignments? We haven't had any due yet. Yeah, too many assignments, too many exams. What's the deal, right? You kind of come in and you see me as this weird guy that tells jokes and stories, and he's a nice guy, right? And Martin, he's also the guy that's going to fail you if you don't know your stuff, right? Unfortunately. So you got all those weighting factors. That's kind of the same slide as before, except for this last point, where the intermediate model produces slightly better results as it considers these 15 cost drivers, and the advanced mode even has many more cost drivers. And this is the formula, right? So again, the different modes, organic, semi-detached, embedded, in terms of calculating effort in person months, or woman months, or man months, or whatever, in terms of months for an individual worker, the basic formula is the same. Right? You have A times the number of kilolines of code, here it's KDSI, so thousands of delivered source instructions, to the power of B. Yeah? That's exactly what we had in basic COCOMO. Right? The addition is the scaling by the EAF, which again is the product of those different drivers. Yeah? And you notice the constants are different. Right? So for semi-detached, A is 3, whereas for the basic, it was 3 as well, hey? All right, different example. For embedded mode, A is 2.8 for intermediate mode. And it's 2.5 for the basic COCOMO. Right? So whichever one you're using, no, you use the right constants. So if you're using basic level COCOMO, use these constants. If you're using intermediate COCOMO, use these constants. Don't worry, use the right ones.
You're looking at the wrong bit.
Sorry?
Yeah, TDEV is the same as basic.
Oh, was I looking at TDEV?
You're looking at TDEV.
No, I was, eh?
Schedule.
All right.
Actually, Martin, on that.
This is the thing I should be looking at, right?
It's
A.
the one above. You're looking at embedded in a different one.
Was I?
Yes, you're going A or embedded in the
So let's look at embedded. A is 2.8. Embedded A is 3.6.
It's actually bigger.
Go. B is 1.2. Same 1.2. Yeah. This is the yes.
So just on back on TDEV,
Yeah.
the constant C.
Yeah. So those constants are the same as.
Oh, okay, yeah.
as-
Because
as
I remember it
basic.
said it depends on mode, but C is 2.5 across the board by the looks of it.
Is it?
I don't know. I
2.5,
haven't-
2.5, 2.5, yes. Is only the exponents, and you're going from a range of 0.32 to 0.38.
Yeah, so that's D is the exponents.
That's right.
Yeah, so cool.
Right. So, an example. You're provided with this information. This information, right? So complexity is high, A cap is low, scared he's very high. X is low, and all other cost drivers are nominal. So you look up on the table, CPLX is high, CPLX high, 1.15. So you chuck in a 1.15. Now they don't follow the same order here. Just to be different, they follow the same color. So red goes with red, and then purple goes with purple, and light blue goes with light blue, and green. Our favorite color goes with green. There you go. And they don't have the times by one, times all the other. You don't have to do that. So basically for this, the EAF is 1.7. So if you want to plug it into these equations, if you're using semi-detached 3 times KDSI to the power of 1.12, and again the power gets done first, multiplied by EAF, 1.7. And here's an example with organic mode, 25 kLOX. So the organic mode version is this, with 3.2 and to the power of 1.05. So you put in 25 as the kLOX, you put in 1.7 as the AF, and you get 159.75. Do you get that? Or do you get more numbers after the decimal point? Probably. I haven't done the calculation myself.
Great, in your head, Martin.
Sorry?
In your head.
Yeah, it's actually 746285371 recurring. Is that correct?
Check it so we can say.
If that's correct, I'll be very surprised. I was just making that all up. Like I can remember pi to like one decimal place, but that's about it. It's 3.7, right?
Pi is exactly 3.
Wasn't one.
Sorry, what's pi? 3.1415927 and some other numbers no one cares about. And I could make those up as well, and I wouldn't know.
How do you eat?
Don't do E. It's illegal. It's gonna. So is not a real emotion. It feels real, no, but
He's a more fun number than I am.
Do it with someone.
that's it. Okay, there you go. So that's it. So now you know everything to do those questions in the assignment. Do we have more? This is kind of where we got to, right? So this shows you this economy of scale. Basically, it's saying, well, it's not just a linear relationship that the more lines of code you have, the effort goes up linearly. There's all kinds of complications, and it's actually more like an exponential increase. And this is why, right? Because the more people you add to a project, the more complexity you have in communication. Right? If you have one person, they don't have to talk to anyone, and they understand, they know exactly what's been done when they come in the morning. If they've done something, they've done it. They've made all the decisions. It is very, very simple. But the more people you add, the more possible lines of communication there are, the more misunderstandings there are, and so on. Bigger software might have a more complicated interface. Right? And so rather than having one screen with some options, eventually you grow where you might have several screens and you have to work out how to layer them, how to organize them, and so on. A bigger problem is testing. Right? So this also has to do with a bigger product, but also has to do with the bigger number of people. Right? You've got multiple people working on different parts. You have to do even extra testing to make sure they've understood how those things are supposed to integrate together. And management is the last one. No, we talk about management. There's a whole lecture on it next week. It's going to be fantastic. But yeah, the different types of management, whether it's effective or ineffective, can complicate projects. What am I doing? Yeah, next slide. So now I'm used to looking at the PowerPoint document, so I'm scrolling through it, but it's changing the slides too fast. Jeez. When's this lunch? Okay, so other alternatives of effort estimation. So we've covered COCOMO a little bit. Other ones are Watson Felix, Bailey Basili, the simple B model. B is the person who came up with COCOMO, and the DOD model and this one for K-logs greater than 9, so more than 9,000 lines of code. And you can kind of see that they're kind of very, very similar.
They look very different.
Yeah. You get K-logs, you put them to a power, you multiply by something,
And I don't see similarities.
you might have an addition. The only thing that's different is the numbers. Right? And these, well, I guess the closest one is Bailey Basili, where he tries to have some kind of a factor, but it's fixed at 5.5, right? Whereas with intermediate COCOMO, you actually calculate a number based on decomposition of all these things and how important they are. And really the main thing to stress is you get the same number of kilolines of code and you put it into each model and you get a different answer. Right? So what do? You say, well, I don't have much time to do this project or develop this product, so I'll pick the lowest one. And that way I'll get it done faster.
Because I'm charging for it.
Or you want to charge the most for it, so you pick the biggest one and tell the client, this is how long it's going to take. Based on my model, give me this money. Right? And the thing to remember is you're actually measuring the same thing. And the number of, however many months it's going to take to develop isn't going to change by the ruler you're using to measure it. Right? But if you If you want to make it even shorter, you just change the numbers around, right, and get an even lower number, right? It doesn't change this actual development, right? It's just an estimate of how much effort it's going to take. So really the key is not to stick to one, but really calculate a variety and have in your mind a range. And this is how long it's probably going to take, plus or minus, right? And the more critical the project is, the more you want to use models that actually look into the details of the project. You know, like intermediate COCOMO, the really high risk, then high level COCOMO, you know, detailed function points and so on. Right? Which kind of also brings me, so you need to work out a range, because one of them, or each one is probably not accurate anyway, right? You want to get directly on it. But how do you evaluate the accuracy of cost estimation? And basically you have to say, well, okay, after the fact, after you've already done it, you know how long it took. You know how many lines of code it has, right? So what did you predict? What's the actual? And take the difference, right? That's how you tell the difference, you know, between two things. You take one and you subtract the other one, okay? And there's various ways to express it, right? Now, just because you work on one project, you estimate this, and you actually got that, and that's the difference, that doesn't mean it's going to be the case for all the projects, all the projects you do. So kind of as you go along, as you do more and more projects, you get a better idea of what an average difference between what you're saying it will be and what it actually is. And then you adjust your weighting factors to suit, to kind of bring it back down to reality. And two standard ways of measuring this or evaluating the accuracy of your cost estimation is spread and MMRE. Right. MMRE stands for mean magnitude of relative error. Right. And does it have, yeah, no, it's got the actual formula here. So this formula here, and I'll point to it explicitly with my mouse, is MRE, it's not MMRE. So the magnitude of relative error, that's right.
Yeah, as I read it, I'm like, ah.
So what was your estimate? Take the actual, get the absolute value because you don't really care about negative or positive. And here actually this version takes the absolute value at the end. That doesn't really matter whether you take it in the brackets or outside. You get the same answer. So the actual difference between actual and estimated divided by the actual, right? So you're getting the relative error to how big the actual thing was. Right? And the mean magnitude of relative error is the average of all those for several projects. So you sum them up for a number of projects, divide by the number of projects. As an example, now here are made up examples of how many projects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects. Right? For one, we estimated that the effort would be 20 person months, and actually it took 25. For another one, we said it's going to take 131 man months, but actually it took 100. Right? And so you take, for each one of those, you get a mean relative error. So 20 minus 25 or 25 minus 20 doesn't matter because you've got that absolute value in there. What's the difference between 25 and 5? 5, right? So that's why we have 5 there. That's why we have 5 there. And you divide by the actual, divide by 25, you get 0.2. 131 take 100. is 31 divided by actual effort divided by 100. And you get 0.31. You get 0.167, 0.3 and 0.1. And the MMRE, the mean of the,
I love being an example.
mean relative error is you add those up and you divide by 5, by the total. You get the average is 0.21. Yeah. So is that good or is that bad?
That depends on which one you're looking at.
Well, if you're looking at that, is 0.21 good
So
or
that-
bad?
well, it's-
You would know from your assignment.
it-
Depends on the trade.
Because the
Well, there's guidelines for PRED and there's guidelines for
The
MMRE.
researcher said below 0.25 was good, but it said that Bohm said that it was below 0.1 was good.
Oh, you're-
And
you're-
so
you're reading
Bohm's
ahead
is
here.
bad, according to the researchers, is good.
Yeah, there you go. It's in fact the next slide, right? So it's shown by researchers that a model's estimate is accurate if MMRE is less than 0.25. Well, really by definition is accurate if MMRE is 0, right? And even then, you might have an equal amount going over and going under. You know, because we do absolute value, right?
Yeah.
So forget that. But 0 means accurate. If it's more than 0, it's not accurate. Right? It's really how much inaccuracy you're prepared to accept. So some people decided that 0.25 is acceptable. Beam says 0.1.
That was 2 slides
Well,
prior.
That was 2 slides ago. There you go.
It all depends on your sample size as well. So the larger your model is, like your model for your MMRE.
Yeah, if it's an MMRE and you've only done one project, then it's probably not a very
No,
good indication, right?
Yeah, no, because you're just listening to the noise of the data at that point in time. So ideally, you could factor in the MMRE into your cost estimations going forward.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. All right. Now, PRED, as it says at the top of this slide, is related to MMRE, and it's basically the percentage of the ones you've done that have gone above a certain thing. Right? So basically PRED, you choose a number. So if you're prepared to accept 0.25, and this is actually where it differs between the example on the slides, where there's got 2 examples, and this says less than 0.25, but later on in these slides it'll say, is it actually, no, it's even on this very same slide, right? So it's been agreed less than 0.25, but the point before says, so if you're looking at a PRED of 0.25, so you're looking at data points in MRE equal to or less than 0.25. Actually, does it work out? I don't know, maybe. So basically, the way you read this, you count the number of ones where the MRE, not the MMRE, the MRE is less than or equal to 0.25. So here we've got 1,
So you've got
2, 3, and you divide by the total. So 3 divided by 5. There you go. Not that great, right? Is it 60?
Yeah, 60.
God. So that's not good. Because, well, what was MMRE? 0.21. So it's okay on the MMRE, it's less than 0.25, but it's not so good on the PRED because we're lower than 75%. And that's the kind of discussion I'm looking for, in assignment deliverable 1, that last question. Okay, it's great, you can calculate me some numbers, but does it mean it's good or bad? Should I be refining my model? Yes.
Wait, so is 0.25 actually included? Is it? Wait,
I kind of misread it because this is actually talking about NMRE. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's like an infinitesimal place on the continuous thing, right? So it's not a big deal. But MMRE less than 0.25 and individual MREs less than or equal to 0.25. Now, I know why you're asking is because in the assignment there's one that's actually equal to 0.25, right? Is that why the question's coming?
No.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, it is there. So I'll tell you, follow this, because that's what it says on the lecture notes. You could go either way on it actually, because like it's not like a like a big deal, but do less than or equal to 0.25. Yes.
ABS?
Sorry?
What's ABS?
Absolutely.
ABS. Where do you see that?
Yeah.
There's on previous.
Absolute value.
So you give it a
Yeah,
negative.
if it's a negative, you make it a positive.
It's just, it's positive regardless. So it's positive.
Yeah.
This guy, right? Absolute value of it. So basically, disregard the sign, make it a positive. Right? So it takes a number which has a direction, positive or negative, and just gets its magnitude and disregards that direction.
The maths part does it is we'll first square the number and then you square root that number.
That's the most complicated way to do it.
Square root the number and then you make it positive regardless, then square root now make it
No, because if
and
it's
how it's
positive,
defined.
it's times by negative.
That's the way to do it.
That's actually
Yeah.
how they do it. That's what it's telling you to do. Just ignore the sign.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Well, I mean, the simplest way, if you're storing it as a signed number, just disregard that. Was it the most significant bit?
Yes.
No, you'd have to do a one's complement.
There you go. Someone's not there.
One's complement or two complement? One's complement.
Or if less than 0,
Yeah.
multiply by -1. Or take the square root, and if you get an error,
That's why you square it first and then you can square it back.
Alright. Okay, so are we done with cost estimation? Should we go back to the risk? There's something I've forgotten to do. There's two things actually. I've forgotten to turn on the aircon. You think you guys deserve it? Or should I make you sweat? And, well, now we go back and do risk.
But what did you forget? You said you forgot two things. One was the aircon. What was the other thing?
Well, the thing that we need to go back and do risk.
Okay.
Risk management.
When I say I've forgotten something, it kind of means I've remembered it now. Otherwise, I just leave, right, and go to that welcome lunch and
That'd be great.
enjoy the cool weather and eating free food and consuming all kinds of delicious drinks there. Can you imagine it? Sorry?
That does look like there's a free barbecue.
Yeah, no. If you know, can you imagine how tasty it's going to be? Let's just imagine that for the next 45 minutes, and then go there and find out it's all gone. So the second part of the lecture is about risk, and there's two types of risk, and this lecture is about one of them. This lecture is about process risk. Right, in other words, what's the risk associated with some key person leaving the thing and you can't find a replacement, versus the product risk? What if there's a bug in the code? You fix it, right? So what is risk? Right? Risk is basically something that hasn't happened yet. Once it happens, it's not a risk anymore, it's an issue. It's happened. And there's several kind of rules of how you define it or how do you manage it. But it's basically the possibility of suffering loss. And there's two parts to a risk. How likely it is to happen. And if it happens, so what? What's the cost? Right? And you need to be aware of both of those before deciding how important is that risk to manage. So, why should we manage risk? Because it avoids rework, for one. Like it says there, rework on erroneous requirements consumes 40 to 50% of the total cost of a project. And reworking the requirements once the software is operational costs about 100 times more.
What's erroneous mean?
Not right. There's an error in them.
Oh, okay.
You've never come across the term.
No, never looked on the news.
You don't hang around with intellectuals. They use terms like erroneous. That's it.
I say, but sadly there's no intellectuals in here, so I don't hang around with.
You've never heard the phrase, "No, excuse me, sir, you're using that urinal erroneous." I'm kidding here. Right? So it avoids overwork, but it also rewards overkill. This is the second point. Because if something's not very likely to happen, and even if it does, it's not going to be important, you're not going to focus much effort on thinking about it and managing it. All right? And this is the good one, from our friend Beam. So risk management has two parts. Got to assess the risk, and then we have to control the risk, so that we don't get issues or to prevent issues happening. And the actual assessment of the risk, you can break down into trying to identify what the actual risks might be. And there's several tools you can use to do that. There could be standard checklists to use, looking at the decision drivers behind the product. Okay, what's really driving these requirements, analyzing those. You can do an analysis of all the different assumptions that have been made and giving you those requirements. You can decompose a product and look at individual parts of it to look for risk. And in the end, you're going to say, okay, these are the possible risks for my project. Then you go for risk analysis and you look at each individual one of those, and then basically you go, okay, how likely is it to happen, and what's the cost of it happening? And you basically multiply them together, and you get some kind of a risk magnitude measure. And then there's various tools to do that. Right? So once you've identified the risk and you've analyzed them to work out the magnitude of each one in terms of likelihood and cost, then you prioritize. Right? So there's this risk prioritization. Which one is the most important to think about? Which one is the least important? You might have a top 10 or so much. So you look at things like risk exposure, risk leverage, compound risk reduction. So if you reduce this thing, or if you change this thing, maybe it's going to take away all these different risks, all kinds of things. But basically, you have a list of risks, most important, least important to tackle based on this kind of risk value. And then you go and control the risk, right, based on that information. And that's got 3 parts to it as well. You do some planning. Right, so how should we approach this basically? Then you try to resolve the risks. And once the project is going, you monitor the risks and you adjust. Yeah? So the risk management planning can involve several things, right? So if there's uncertainty about a certain thing, and that's the risk, that we don't know maybe you want to use this particular component, and the risk is it might be a piece of not so quality software. Right? So we might buy some information or gather some information in. No, if it's just an online component, you look at the forum. Does everyone say that this is broken? Right? Risk avoidance. Well, don't use that component. Or you want this feature in your product, but it's so risky, don't have that feature in. Avoid the risk. Transfer the risk. Sorry? Insurance, yeah, okay, that's maybe. Right. Risk transfer basically means I've been given this task, I have to develop this thing. If I don't do it right, I'm going to be in trouble. So I'm going to pay you some money, develop this thing. I've transferred the risk to you. Right? It's the same when you've got large civil engineering projects, you've got this big company that does it, and they transfer the risk down to these contractors. And so the contractor puts in all his effort, spends all his money, but they don't deliver, so they don't get paid, and they go under, right? And the big developer, they don't have the thing they want, but they haven't spent the money. Right? There you go. The very important thing to do with risk transfer, when you actually need the thing as well, is that you need to have a balance of the risk, right? So if I want to do something and it's very, very important to me, and I'm going to transfer the risk to you, I need to transfer the consequences to you as well.
So I was just telling him, I've had that.
Because if I give you this risky thing to do and you can just walk away from it with no consequence, I'll still be in trouble because I need that thing. I keep getting phone calls. So after the lecture I'll answer it.
I thought you were worried about missing your lunch.
No. I mean, basically the moral of that story is never trust Australia Post. No, they'll lose even registered mail, even passports. There you go. Apparently they've delivered it, not to us.
So if you've lost your passport, do we need to call Border Patrol?
I've got my son's passport. The other one came. I've got two kids. And to get a tracking number, you've got to call the passport people and you've got to wait, and then they give you the tracking number. So after it hasn't come for a couple of weeks, we finally call, get the tracking number, go to the tracking site, it's been delivered. Okay. Someone signed for it.
That's shocking.
So yeah, transfer the risk, but transfer the consequences as well. Group work is the same, right? No, you give the critical task to a team member who can't do the job, they're not in trouble because they don't carry they fail, type of person, but it affects you. Various ways of risk reduction, risk element planning, risk plan integration, and all kinds of things, right? So you plan for it, then you implement things that actually reduce the risk. Right. So you can use prototypes and simulations. Now, if you're not sure how this thing is going to go, simulate, right? No. Let's say you're in the army and you want to buy a new tank, and the manufacturer says it's got these capabilities. Well, do some simulations. If it has these capabilities, will it be any good against this type of scenario? Right? Have appropriate staffing to manage the risk and so on. And again, once your project is going, keep tracking your schedule, keep tracking your milestones. Just keep it up. I've been checking my watch, so it thinks I'm lifting heavy weights, maybe.
Work out.
Having your top 10 list of things that you're tracking. Is the project on schedule? Is it on time? Do a risk reassessment and take corrective action. And as basic points in the project where you say, well, I'm planning this project so if risk grows to be on this much, I'm going to cancel it. Right? And typically the two dimensions of that are the schedule in terms of time and in terms of budget. So if it goes over this budget, that's it, we're not doing anymore. If it goes over this length of time, we're not doing it anymore. And there's kind of an interplay between the two. And that's it. And this just talks about the stuff I just talked about. Right? So let's just see if I missed anything. So the loss of probability and magnitude gives you the amount of risk, and then you prioritize based on that. This is a very good formula. So risk exposure is the probability of the risk multiplied by the magnitude of the loss. In actual fact, you can't get concrete numbers for those, right? You can't calculate the exact probability that something's going to happen. And you can't really forecast the loss very accurately either, right? So it's good to use as a guideline. And it's kind of meant to be used as kind of a nominal value. Rather than take the number in itself, you can just say, well, this risk is more important than this risk. And they're less important than this risk. Rather than trying to do any kind of detailed analysis on these numbers that actually don't mean that much in themselves.
But do you want a bigger or lower number with that one?
You want a lower number. No? Basically, both of these numbers that you're multiplying together, you want the lowest you can have. Right? You want the probability of 0 that this thing will occur. And if it occurs, you want to incur 0 loss. It only takes one of those numbers to be 0 and your risk exposure is 0, right? So if it's a very likely thing to happen, but you're not going to lose anything, there's not really a risk, right? And if the loss is going to be really, really big, but probability is almost 0, then means you're probably okay, right? Otherwise, no one's going to ever do anything. Right? Why would I give you guys lectures? Because the building might collapse and we might all die, right? I better just stay at home. But hang on, what if that collapses? Oh, now I'm freaking out, right? So you've got to assess the probability and the magnitude of the loss. So here's some examples actually, right? So from Beam, the actual risk and the participants. So some examples are budget overrun. It's not a risk. It's an outcome that's not satisfactory. In other words, right? A schedule slip, the wrong functionality, performance and reliability shortfalls. And poor quality, poor maintainability as well. And you come up with a matrix. Now you identify your concrete risks in the project. So for example, design does not satisfy high level requirement. With probability 2, size of loss 8, I don't know what units those things are. But basically you multiply those through, you get your risk exposure, and again, it's not the actual magnitude of the number, because you're kind of making up these units by saying this is more probable than the other one, this you lose more than the other one. In terms of risk exposure, you look at the relative size again. You look which one is higher, which one is lower, even not relative size. Just because we've got 30 and we've got 4, that doesn't mean it's that kind of relationship, right? If you've got 1 and 4, doesn't mean this one is 4 times as likely to happen. It's just it's more likely to happen. or less likely to happen, but more cost will be incurred, right? Is more important. And yeah, the risk reference or reference, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's basically the break point where you stop the project. You know, if your risk has gone past a certain value, and if you go for this example I mentioned where you look at cost and schedule, this is kind of what it looks like. You know? So the blue surface there is where you stop the project, and you can get to it. Well, with this thing, actually, you can overrun, with this particular example, you can overrun the cost as much as you can. As long as you've never slipped on your schedule, you'll keep it going. I guess that's okay, because if you haven't slipped your schedule, you'll know when it's going to finish. All right? Maybe. It doesn't matter how much you've overrun your schedule, as long as your cost is going okay, you keep going. It kind of makes sense, right? It doesn't cost you any. I mean, in a real project, the client's going to need it at some stage, I guess. So you're going to have to deliver something sometime. All right, and this talks about the action management steps. What I have. This is a good one, and this is probably what we might leave off on, considering the next slide is about software cost estimation, and we've already done that, right? But the SEI, the Software Engineering Institute, gives us this kind of a model of continuous risk management, which basically says risk isn't something that you work out at the start of a project, and then you kind of forget about it or just track that. Because as the project develops and grows, you'll have things coming around that might have risks that you didn't anticipate, right? And particularly if you're using an iterative, incremental approach, you'll integrate some more activities into your process. Those will have associated risks. So you identify the risks, anticipate what can go wrong, what's important. So this is where you categorize the risk, plan to take the action, and then track the actions. Then you integrate more activities, and you have to do that again and again. So every time you make a change, there might be new risks introduced. And that's all I have today.